So of all the features in HTML5, arguably the most important to Flash developers is the canvas tag. And this is very similar to the bitmap data object that we have in Flash. And I want to take a couple of minutes just to go over how it's similar and then how it's also a little bit different than bitmap data. So at its essence, a bitmap data object is just a grid of pixels which we can manipulate. Well, the same is true of canvas. So if we create a canvas that's, let's say, 800 by 600, well, that's going to be a canvas of 800 pixels wide by 600 pixels tall. And we can set and retrieve pixel values on that grid using a coordinate system, and 0, 0 being the upper left. At that level, it's exactly the same concept as the bitmap data class. So here's some ActionScript 3 code for how we would create our bitmap data object. We would first create an instance of bitmap data, create it 800 by 600, and then we would need to attach that to a bitmap object in order to put it onto the display list. And we essentially want to add that bitmap to the display list, which we use the addChild method for. When working with Canvas, now you can go ahead and create everything in JavaScript, but generally speaking, you're going to want to create a Canvas tag in your HTML code, which you give an ID, and you also give it a width and height. So here, the same as the previous example, 800 by 600. And then inside of your JavaScript, you first need to get a reference to that Canvas element, and for that we use document.getElementById and pass in the ID of our Canvas element. But then we need to get the drawing context, and for that we use the getContext method of the Canvas class. You can see here that I'm passing in 2D for the context, and the reason for that is there's also an experimental 3D context, which is essentially what WebGL is, and we'll be looking at that in a later chapter. But once I have that context object, which I'm storing here in a variable called CTX, I can then use that to draw to the canvas and manipulate it in any way that I choose. So inside of Flash, we have a graphics class. So each display object has a graphics object on it with which we can do things like draw lines, draw curves, rectangles, things like that. Well, the canvas tag itself also has a vector drawing API. And here are the methods that are available to you to actually dynamically draw at runtime. And you'll notice that a lot of these are very similar to what you have inside of Flash. Move to, line to, rect, arc. All of these same concepts that you're used to with the Flash drawing API exist also on the Canvas API in HTML5. So the way in Flash with which we actually draw an object onto our bitmap data canvas is we use the draw method. So if I have a bitmap data named BMD, I can say bmd.draw and pass in a display object, and it will actually draw that display object into my bitmap data canvas. Well, inside of HTML5 canvas, we have a couple of different methods. First, we have the draw image method, and this allows us to actually draw in an existing image object, which could be, a PNG, a JPEG. We can draw that into the canvas. Now, this method also allows us to draw other canvases into our main canvas, and we're going to look at later on in this chapter exactly what you would use that for. And then there's also methods like fill text, and this allows us to actually render text directly onto our canvas element in HTML5. So the basic concepts are very similar between bitmap data and HTML5 canvas in that you're essentially working with a grid of pixels, and you can draw objects to it, manipulate the individual pixel values. And throughout this chapter, I'm going to walk you through all of the various tools that you have available in HTML5 to work with Canvas.